Good evening. This is Victor Riesel with the interview of the week, and we continue on into what we like to call the second edition of the newspaper of the air. And before we went off for a minute, Burt Roberts, the district attorney of the Bronx, was talking about the importance of the button men, who many of us have thought merely as muscle informers. And a question comes up in discussion off mic as to whether or not in this vast apparatus he has described in the Bronx and in Westchester, and obviously therefore must have a parallel in other counties, is there such a thing as a crime lobby in Albany, in the state capital or capitals, which protect the interests of this organized crime, this underworld, and which have contact with the state legislators? I asked you that question, Burton Roberts.
Well, there are certain pieces of legislation which every once in a while I think are propelled or are influenced by certain individuals who seek to benefit from legislation which may hamper law enforcement. I'm hesitant to proceed any further on that, but I think that Ralph is in a better position to proceed further.
Yeah, I'd like to say this, Vic. It's plain and simple. Organized crime is big business. Big business has lobbyists. Big business makes campaign contributions. Big business is for certain legislation and against other. Big business favors certain candidates and against other. The difference between big business as we generally think of it and the big business of organized crime is simply this. I can take you to Washington, D.C., I can take you to state houses all over the country, and I can identify the lobbyists of regular big business. They register, they place their names on record, they write to the congressman, open letters to the press, and so on. The lobbyists of organized crime don't do that. They don't register. We don't know who they are. We can't trace their campaign contributions as readily, but they exist.
Well, we may suspect who they are.
Well, isn't it true that what we're doing is really chafing under the manacles of the inability to mention names? We all know who they are. We know that in Albany, at least one fellow who has been associated with the mafia, all right, with organized crime, all right, with that section which has infiltrated New Jersey laborers today, one of the most en courant, en rapport chaps in Albany when the state legislature is in session. Of course he's there. But so
Victor,
we don't mention names, but we do get to these microphones because William Brennan III, who didn't have the judiciousness of William Brennan II to keep still in this, as I think ricocheted, has said that 6 legislatures in Jersey, and obviously either the man is a fool or a crusader or who talks too much, but obviously he must have the 6 names in mind.
But there's a history, Vic. There's a history.
But we get to this.
Charlie Banaggio said, I've got to control the next governor of this state in Missouri. And when he didn't control the governor, he was machine gunned in the political club that he was the leader of in Missouri. You don't have to go back as far as 1948. Right now, you have a rather strong allegation made by Life magazine about a member of the Congress. I hope that we hear the full argument pro and con. I'm not prejudging anything, but I do think, for example, that Congressman Gallagher of New Jersey is entitled to the same full and complete hearing that Congressman Clayton Powell got by a body of his own peers in the Congress.
Well,
I hope that he gets that.
Would you, Dave Satz, as the U.S. Attorney for the region of New Jersey, urge this? Here there was a wiretap. I mean, was there a conversation? Was there not a conversation? All I know is that a hearing of some House subcommittee under somebody from Florida, Mr. Gallagher got terribly exercised about the use of a computer that Fred Vinson Jr. was talking about, and said, well, this might be a violation of civil liberties, and what happens, how do you program it out, and so on. But what have you to say as the regional attorney about wiretaps, which...
Well, wait a minute. We're talking about wiretaps?
No, we're talking about Gallagher. We're talking about... Let's talk about wiretap. Let's talk about Gallagher.
Concerned.
Let's talk about Gallagher. Let's talk about the fact that wiretapping has been legal for some 30 years, like this state.
Not in New Jersey.
But
New Jersey, it's flatly illegal and has been always since the concept, whether you go back to 605 and the Federal Communications Act.
I think
or what.
Victor is talking about the federal area where bugging, at least, was conducted by federal agents until 1965, when President Johnson, and with the concurrence of Attorney General Clark, signed an executive memorandum which still exists to this day, tonight.
Correct.
We have a very sad situation tonight. We have the Supreme Court having spoken, having said that it is not unconstitutional per se.
And
the legislative branch has responded to that by passing eavesdropping section in the Safe Streets Act. We've heard from those two branches of government, and the executive branch, as of this moment, still has an executive memorandum saying that federal agents cannot use that which has, at least to that degree, been approved by both the legislative branch and the judiciary.
And in addition to that, Victor,
the national crime...
and in addition to that, Frank Hogan, who is Mr. District Attorney, has stated that wiretapping and eavesdropping is the single most important weapon in the arsenal of law enforcement to combat organized crime.
There have been some differences.
With all of that, it's still not utilized in the federal government. And the FBI is for it, and as far as I know, most of the U.S. attorneys appointed by the Attorney General are for it. In fact, I know very few that are against it.
As a matter of fact, Vic,
Well, we also know that the National Crime Commission appointed by the President recommended the use of the wiretapping. Well, what are we saying? We're saying that the President said, look, you should only use this in cases of national security, which means counter-espionage.
I'll say something more than that.
Why?
Mr. Clark, the federal Attorney General,
Well, what are we saying?
and Mr. Sills, the Attorney General in New Jersey, have had various little differences.
But what are we saying?
The one thing on which they were both agreed was that we should not have electronic surveillance. That was the one thing that they both agreed on.
But what are we insinuating?
I'm insinuating, I'm not insinuating anything. I am stating that there are certain public officials who have not been responsive to the record. The record is, and you read the airtels in Rhode Island.
That's right.
The record is that you can obtain certain information by electronic surveillance which is in no other way available to you. You can't talk about lazy investigators or lazy prosecutors. There is a certain type of information which is in no other way available to you.
Let's get to Dave Satz.
Let's finish this,
Yeah,
Victor,
all right,
because this is important, in my opinion.
But what you're saying is
now,
that
what
the
I'm saying,
President of
now
the United
I've
States-
heard certain people who write for newspapers say, well, what does one get out of electronic surveillance?
Yes.
Every big narcotic case that has been made in the States, in New York State, 90% of them have been based upon electronic surveillance, because the only way you can move is when you know the narcotics is there. The only time you can get a search warrant is when you know the narcotics has been delivered. We have gotten 16 pounds of 90% pure heroin by dint of wiretapping. We have gotten a mill busted up in the Bronx in which there were 20 pounds of heroin and 20 people working and cutting up this heroin, which would make some $1 million $5 bags as a result of wiretapping.
Right, and in
In the
Providence...
boxing investigation, wiretapping brought those people to justice. In the case involving the insurance frauds that Al Scotti worked on, it was wiretapping that
And
brought
Vic,
those people to the bar of justice.
if you read those bugs in Providence, Rhode Island,
Yes, I
you
did.
heard Raymond Patriarca talk about our friend in the Attorney General's office, a piece of information...
Why
which was-
hasn't that story been picked up? Why wasn't that story picked up?
well, you also have the
That was
allegations...
singularly the most fantastic oversight by the press of this country I have ever seen. Those airtels are the most
Right.
fabulous, including the fact that one of the Cosa Nostra people talked to, so-called Cosa Nostra people, talked to Patriarch and complains that his son is not calling Mama regularly, and the word goes out, and to me this was most significant. I know you're all busting crime, and you're well, of course,
Victor,
the two of you.
Victor.
Let me say this. So he rules that not only will this boy talk to his mother once or twice a week, but he'll send her $10 each time. But the fact of the matter is that Ralph, is really one of the most fantastic stories.
Right. I think one of the best things that could be done, Victor.
Victor, let me just finish for a moment.
No.
The State Liquor Authority investigation was based on eavesdropping and wiretapping. Every large-scale investigation involving municipal corruption or organized crime had its
Look,
basis.
if you want an impressive list, Bert,
I'm going-
the
I'm-
McClellan Committee.
if you want
the
an
Keep
impressive
Alpha
list-
Committee
No double
got
check.
its information
No,
as a result of wiretapping and eavesdropping.
Well-
All the intelligence on organized crime
Well, what-
has come about as a result of wiretapping.
I
and
wanna
if you
get-
want an impressive list, just look at the list that the Department of Justice admitted to the Supreme Court. Convictions had been obtained on the basis of electronic surveillance.
the Colot case.
No, I'm talking about a whole bunch of them, beginning the first case in which the federal government made an admission was the Black case. That was Bobby Baker's partner. That was the first one which was reversed. The second
No,
one was
I'm
the
gonna-
one of Gentleman
Victor?
Joe Schapani in Brooklyn.
Victor,
and there are a
just-
long list thereafter.
Victor, let me just say this, Victor.
Yes.
Isn't it more reliable, isn't it fairer to have the voice of the culprit, the defendant on the phone admitting his complicity as a result of a court-ordered, court-sanctioned, what amounts to a search warrant, to hear a conversation of crime, than to listen to some bum who's an informant, who the federal government will pull up, who is looking to save himself years in jail and says, I was involved with this one or that one. Is that more reliable?
Well, now-
Is that more fair?
Bert-
Does that adhere more to the principles of civil rights and civil liberties in our country
Bert-
than utilizing a court-sanctioned, court-restricted wiretap, which is equated by the Supreme Court with a search warrant?
Well, Bert, you make your point, and you make it quite strongly, and I think
loudly.
Ralph, no, I think that comes out of the great strength of conviction, and that puts the strength into the voice. But do let me say this, if I pull it all together, and I'd like to get back to Dave Satz, it insinuates, and I'll say it as bluntly as I can, that for some reason that is not entirely due to President Johnson's instinct for civil liberties. We're not talking about civil rights, but civil liberties, as we used to distinguish them. He has denied this powerful weapon to the law enforcement agencies. This is what you're saying, and therefore has hampered the war on organized crime. This is what I gather from your rather strong presentation, from yours, Ralph Salerno, and I'd like to hear from the federal attorney.
Well, you're going to hear a little bit of the other side, because I think Ramsey Clark cannot just be judged on the fact that he took, through the president and directly, a stand from an executive administration point against the use under the Safe Streets and Crime Control Act, against the use of the court-ordered bugging. And I don't even like to think in terms of wiretapping. We're beyond that now with the various sophisticated devices. Personally, I may have some problems with it. As I'm sure Ramsey Clark himself has some problems with the ultimate stand he took. But when you're getting down to organized crime, and you're getting down to the basic ingredients of fighting crime of any type, and organized crime is wrapped right up with it, then I get on my high horse to defend Mr. Clark to this extent.
And the president.
And completely. Well, and the president, I'm looking at my boss right now, for as long as he will be my boss. The money that he has gotten through various programs, and Ralph, you're part of that, the various standards that have been set, I feel have gone further in helping to fight crime and organized crime than anyone in the past, and this you have to look at in the
but how about
sense of
this way,
history. Now,
Dave?
let me go ahead
Yeah,
with this for a
right,
second, Ralph.
okay.
I'm not trying to make a
Maybe
speech.
it could even be better. if he
Well,
used
this is what I'm
electronic
getting
Let's-
at. Now, just
let's-
a moment.
let's
I
do
think
that
this
and
is a whole thing
give Mr.
of
Satz.
dealing with organized crime. If you start out with principles of intelligence, if you start in with investigation
The
and then
strike forces.
prosecution,
Do
I've
you
got a
strike
very
force,
simple one. Yeah, but wait a minute, Dave. How come FBI men are not on the strike forces? Why aren't they on the team?
They
Well, they're
don't.
You send
cooperating.
in,
Now, wait a minute. You
they
go,
do
Ralph.
not participate in the strike forces to the same extent that agents from Federal Narcotics, Secret Service, ATU, and
Labor
other
Department.
agencies participate. They are not participating.
I'm quite sure that you'll find, and I do not know personally of why they are not officially connected, if you want to use the term official. I don't mean that you
They're not
used
in
it,
the
but
coordinated force,
they
obviously.
are coordinated and cooperating to the fullest extent to my knowledge.
That's
Now,
not true.
that may vary from place to place, and I'm not one to characterize the extent to which they are cooperating. But I'm really getting at this. And if you want to look at strike forces, Ralph, you described them well. And I'm glad they're going to be in New Jersey. I've said this before. We've asked for it. They've been coming in.
You don't
on the
think they
boards for-
supersede you? You don't think Jim Featherstone's
I
group?
don't feel they would, and I hope that they don't, and I'm sure that they haven't. I can point to correspondence and so on. We've had excellent relations with the Department of Justice. You're dealing with manpower. I can only stand on my record of having cooperated and had people from the organized crime section throughout my 7.5 years of being in the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, starting out with Henry Ruth, the very person that helped you start there. And Henry then went back to Washington and went on to the National Crime Commission and so on. But what I'm saying here about Ramsey Clark, and putting it in your context, Bert, where you say, well, we need that, why not have it? Maybe at some time, shortly or otherwise, with or without a change of administration. I know that there will be one. There will be a change of thinking in this regard. I think that there has to be first things first and a whole refocusing of attacking crime. A lot of that has taken place in policy, some in legislation. The ideas that have been suggested by people like Ralph Salerno, that have been tried by people like Burton Roberts to make them what they are today, are things that have to be adopted throughout the entire country.
Yeah, but Dave, you see, we get away
Well, let's
from little
refocus. Ralph, no,
Vic
I'm-
asked the question earlier. He said, was there or was there not a wiretap? Which had Congressman Gallagher talking to Bayonne Joe Ziccarelli. That question was asked by a member of the Congress of Attorney General Clark. His reply can only be described as a letter in very carefully couched terms, which doesn't seem to answer the question. Was there or wasn't there? Unless you hit the gut issues such as this, all the science and technology in the world is not going to help us fight organized crime if we don't hit it in the political area, too.
There was, as a matter of fact, wasn't there? Dave
To whom are
Satz.
you asking that question? I
you,
stand
Dave
on-
Satz.
I do not know. I know how Life magazine characterized it. Ramsey Clark made a statement, and he has access to information that I simply don't. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, Ralph knows and Burton knows, at least under Section 605 and under the cases that Ralph started to describe before, and the public has to understand this, no prosecutor wants to have if we're trying to avoid a taint, meaning a lead to a tap, we do not want to have knowledge of the particular tap or bug, because then we will have to reveal it. Under the federal cases, as you know, Ralph, you get into the situation where you have to let's say an informant walks off the street today and gives you a piece of information, and you proceed to investigate, indict, try, and convict. During the process of trial, you were asked the question of, with some support, there was a tap involved. Or was there a tap involved, and give me the source of your information. This is what was the grounding of the Bobby Baker and Chapani and Black cases and so on, and is presently being considered in other respects by the Supreme Court today. If there was a tap, a bug, or whatever you call it, and the prosecutor had wind of it, then he's got to reveal the whole source, the tap, and everything. If he can show that he had nothing to do with the source of the information, then he is able to stand up and prove that the burden's on him, the prosecutor, to prove that there was no tap. And in that way, his information is clean and he escapes any constitutional...
Well, let me just...
Because don't
wanna
forget the
refocus.
taps are not done under court order up until now. We're dealing with pre-Safe Streets and Crime Control Act, so we have to talk about it in
You're
that context.
talking about something which was a violation of law.
Right.
Illegal wiretaps, if they existed. Now, you see, this is where people get the misconception. Illegal wiretapping, I think, is just deplorable. It's a crime. It should be prosecuted vigorously. When I talk about wiretapping and I talk about eavesdropping, I'm talking about a court-restricted type of
Bert, I
eavesdropping.
agree
Well,
with you.
well, let me
And-
break
and
in.
something which is
Bert-
equivalent to a search warrant,
I'm answering the question of Victor's. That's
Yeah,
why
let
I
me
said
get
what I
to,
did.
let me get to this. Let me refocus this for a minute because we're running on to almost 5 or 6 minutes before
I might
we-
say that 605, is now repealed by dint
Very
of the
true,
new
Bert. I
legislation.
answered a question of Victor's here, and that's in that particular context. I'm not talking about the present law.
let me get to this. We have the law, and through all this discussion runs an insinuation on the part of some of us around the table, I think at this east end of the table, if I'm geographically correct, that there are some forces, and we don't impugn their motives, I gather, or we may be impugning their motives, who say there shall not be the use of this effective weapon, as Bert Roberts puts it. Now we get down to the influence of government in this fight on organized crime. We have young, in quotes, William Brennan III, saying that there are 6 legislators who feel cozy. He wanted to keep this a secret, so he told it to 20 newspapermen. Now, with the underworld.
There were only 3 at that time.
Well, he found 3 more. Ralph Salerno now brings up the very dramatic Peace and Life magazine. My good friend Bill Lambert, I consider a very fine newsman. And we again come to the insinuation that there is influence in the Congress, which is friendly with this. This was printed in Life magazine, and Congressman Gallagher has refuted it, and he should have his day in the public arena, and so on. Now, what I'm saying to you is, do you think in your state that Life magazine was wrong? Do you think in your state William Brennan was wrong? Do you think, and then I'd like to ask Mr. Roberts and Mr. Salerno, that there is or there is not this kind of coziness or influence by the legislators on this fight? That is, coziness with the Cosa Nostra, influence on the fight against crime. Do you place any credence in what Claire Curran Johnson has said about the pressures on somebody in the New Jersey legislature? This, I think, is the gut question that I want to put to you as the top-ranking law enforcement official, representative of the government in the state of New Jersey.
I am going to wait to hear what is said to the legislature or the committee by the various people who have made their assertions.
Of your knowledge, you don't know.
Now, let me just say this, though. I'm not just going to go on or go out with that kind of remark. I think any legislature is subject to all sorts of pressures, the same way as Mr. Salerno and Mr. Roberts have already talked about it when you put the question to them about New York. I feel that some of the material that is being bandied about may not be, let's say, raised to the criminal level. It may be conflicts of interest. Maybe it's just plain old common sense that people have to sort of shake themselves up and look at. The State Investigation Commission, the Joint Legislative Commission, that there's so many commissions being formed now, I think that
You need an
law
anti-prolif-
enforcement, no, I think law enforcement is going to pull in their horns and not start giving information out because there's so much competition. But to the extent that what has been said, the so-called exposure to the problem, that may very well be good in the long run so that people can set some standards. Now, darn it all, the legislature for the past 10, 15 years has been in New Jersey considering a conflict of interest bill. Some parts of it have been passed, other parts have been rejected, and I dare say that some of the things that may be brought up at these commission hearings will be conflict of interest. Some of it, as Mr. Brennan has said, at least in one case, there's a crime. Now, that's going to have to go through the regular processes for the purpose of appropriate investigation. The truth will out, and the chips fall where they may. I can only say that in order to learn the degree of this, we're just going to have to wait to see, and I'm not going to draw any conclusions. I think that a lot of people can be corrupt. It's are they corrupt, and what is the atmosphere behind it? And New Jersey recognizes this. And as Ralph said when I talked about state police, you do have very legitimate and hard fighting organizations to combat this. You also have the problem of the public giving, and I'm so serious about this, enough time and effort and money to fighting, not just the looter on the corner, the person that's breaking into the store. You've got to give money and effort from the top command right down to the cop on the beat so that you can prove local law enforcement, so that people aren't taking bribes, et cetera, right down the line. I don't know, that could be another program of it in itself. I think to date, one of the reasons why New Jersey hasn't had the tools to fight some of this has been because they've been shortchanged in large degree in certain areas and been ignored. The organized crime problem has been there. We've fought it. As you know, the strike force is going to augment what we've done. And on the state level, attention has to be paid and focused on the problem, and the improvement can come all the way around.
Dave, do you think that New Jersey deserves the appellation of being the most corrupt state in the nation?
I think there are other states that are equally, if not more, corrupt.
Most of them are south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Well, there's certain things that happen in other metropolitan areas which come to the attention of the public once in a while, which are
No,
some magnitude.
I'd
don't
say
mean
this. I can go
compare
back to
one with another.
65, Dave. I can go back to 1965 when
This
two
is Ralph Salerno.
men from the New York City Police Department, an FBI agent, and a state trooper went to cover a wake over there. They
Where?
notified in Jersey City.
Yeah.
They notified the local police. They were not tiptoeing around or gumshoeing around. They were made welcome there. They made their observations, and they did this because they had information that a gentleman now living in Florida, Eddie McGrath, who still exercises some control on the waterfront, was coming north to that wake, and it would be used as a meeting place for others from New York who wanted to meet him. That was their interest in covering the thing. Everything went along fine until a political figure showed up to pay his respects at that wake, found out that there were law enforcement men taking license plate numbers and making observation, and 4 law enforcement men were given a police escort out of Jersey City to the tunnel and told that they would be arrested if they ever came back. Now, I don't think that kind of an occurrence has any counterpart in the history of law enforcement in this country, and that's part of the sordid record of New Jersey.
What about the effort to go down, take a good look at Marcello's domain, and the locals refusing down in Louisiana to give them either a plane or a helicopter to go over, and they had to go to the military to
Ralph,
go.
I'm not trying to defend the state completely. You know that we're fighting just as hard as anyone else, and there's, as I said in
One
my
minute.
little discussion, an awful lot of improvement and beef that has to be put in, an orientation towards the effort. And
Yeah,
you
but
do
one of the-
have
see, but one of the
pockets
things that
in New
one of the
Jersey
things
which will
that
have to be rooted
one of the
out.
things that Attorney General Sills has complained about is that the federal government has not given him all the cooperation he could have.
Well, that's a subject of some more minutes than
Would you-
just 30
could you say-
seconds.
could you say yes or no?
I say that that's not so, that he has been given substantial cooperation.
We'll have to, as they say in the radio business, cut because of the time. You've just been listening to U.S. Attorney for the region of New Jersey, David Satz, and to Ralph Salerno, a crime consultant and former head of the Mafia Desk of the Central Intelligence Bureau of the New York City Police Department, and to the very energetic and outspoken Burton Roberts, District Attorney of the Borough of the Bronx, my home borough. This is Victor Riesel of the Publishers Syndicate. Gentlemen, thanks, and if you want to stay, we'll go for another 2 hours. Good night. Good evening. This is Victor Riesel with the interview of the week. We cut across our traditional lines this evening, and our guest is from what we would call upstate New York, and it's Senator John H. Hughes, who is chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee on Crime, who, with his hearings last week, startled the city with the revelations of what many of us didn't know was going on Wall Street and the invasion of business. And now, Senator, we understand you're going to start a new series of hearings tomorrow morning, and I wonder whether or not you couldn't talk a little about them and why you're going into them and the general purposes of the committee, but why and where tomorrow morning?
Well, tomorrow morning we meet at the County Lawyers Association building on Vesey Street, and this is a committee, a joint legislative committee, with the, as you say, designated to investigate crime generally and all of its aspects. We did start the hearings 2 weeks ago on organized crime and its relation to business. And then a week ago in the Senate on Monday, Senator Giuffrida of Suffolk County gave a talk in which he criticized bitterly the administration of the state university unit there called Stony Brook, and suggested that some inquiry ought to be made in regard to arrests which had been carried out by the police department in connection with the use of dope by students.
Well, Senator, there must have been some preliminary hearings, testimony, or you're familiar with what you're going into, or you wouldn't be sitting in the chair there. What have you found so far that's indicative of the use of narcotics? Is it narcotics? Is it heroin? Is it marijuana? Is it LSD? What are you looking for? What do
Well,
you
I
think
understand it's a little of everything, Mr. Riesel. The way it came about was this. Senator Giuffrida says that about a year ago he had complaints from various people about the use of drugs of one kind or another at this campus. And so he took it up with the president of the state university there and talked with him and told him that he thought it would be well if they had this problem to clean it up. And then he claims that he had reassurances from then on until the fall of 1967, at which time he said that he had assurances that the situation was well in hand. He got a contrary view from the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Barry, and this subsequently followed up with a what's been referred to as a raid, although it wasn't really a raid. I guess it was really arrests. The matter was brought to the attention of the grand jury, and some 38 people were indicted for the sale of narcotics of one kind or another, which in each instance is a felony. And my understanding is they went in on a given night, whenever it was, a few weeks ago, and picked up the persons whom the grand jury had indicted.
Well, is there any reason to believe that there's a relationship to organized crime? Are these who were arrested just independent pushers, and what were they pushing, Senator?
Well, I don't think this is not directly related to the question of organized crime, which I mentioned a few minutes earlier.
Sure.
It is a subject matter in and of itself. On the other hand, it would appear from this preliminary information which I have that there were quantities of various types of drugs which were being used on the campus.
Could we go into those? Was there heroin? Was there?
I don't know about heroin, but they've mentioned hashish and marijuana and opium, and then the barbiturates of one kind or another.
LSD as well?
And LSD, and whatever variations of that.
How widely used were they?
Well, I've heard all sorts of figures, from 400 to maybe 1,000 or more.
What you're
individuals.
saying? You mean at Stony Brook?
Yes.
Undergraduates at the
That's right.
State University?
But this was apparently, it appears to be, and this we'll find out from the testimony of the people who were there, a rather loosely operated affair, because finally the police put their own undercover man in the institution, and they lived there, and apparently this was an easy thing to do. They didn't have to make any arrangements with the university. As I understand it, you simply move in. If you make a friend who will harbor you in his room, this is a place for you to live. So these undercover men spent considerable time there, how much I don't know, and they discovered and made the cases, I guess, upon which the indictments were later rendered.
Well, Senator, college was never like this for us, I would say.
No, and apparently this isn't the only place. This is just one, and I don't think this should be considered to be an indictment of the whole university system by any means. But
well, could we, Senator, go into first your rough estimate of between 400 and 1,000? How many students are there at the Stony Brook?
I think just over 5,000.
Well, roughly then we'd find that anywhere from 8 to 10% to 20% of the students possibly are involved in taking some form of marijuana at this one section of the State University.
If the information which has been given me, which is hearsay, is true, yes.
What, by hearsay, you mean from the police department?
Well, I don't have it from the police department. I have it from the senator who talked with a lot of people involved in this.
Where is it coming from? Who's selling it?
Well, I was told last night by my counsel, who stopped by to bring me up to date on our hearing.
Chief counsel for your...
Yes, his name is Edward McLaughlin, and he is a Syracusan now. That actually there were people on the campus who were, you remember how the fellows used to give out gum to get you interested in juicy fruit or whatever it might be? Well, apparently they had some people on the campus who were doing that sort of thing with marijuana cigarettes, and then suggesting that there are other forms of the same type of thing if people wanted it.
Well, what would be the source of this? You have, I'm sure, been in contact with the state police, the state troopers, possibly the New York City police, and, of course, the police commissioners there.
Well, I'm frank to say that I don't know what the source is. And I don't know. I think there are a series of individuals, all of those, as I understand it, of 38 persons who have been indicted in this one transaction.
Students, sir?
I was just going to say 38 persons, of whom I understand 21 were students and 17 were outsiders. And now these are persons, as I pointed out, who apparently were allowed to live on the campus. I don't mean that this was sponsored by the college or university, but they were there by sufferance.
Isn't this, without indicting the president, the dean of men, women, it's a co-ed, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I think it is.
Yes, it is.
Isn't it rather lax? Isn't there no supervision, not only for the infiltration of whatever narcotics there are, and obviously if it can run as high as 20%, that's considerable. What sort of administration can there be of a university section?
Well, I think this is a good question. I hope we'll find the answer after we listen to the witnesses. We have, I think, coming tomorrow, we have the representatives of the police department have been subpoenaed, and the people in the administration whom we think might add to the story to tell us what their views or their version of it is.
Senator, is there any indication anybody in the administration might be part of this in some fashion? It doesn't seem likely that this could happen without someone in authority knowing it.
Well, I think this is a fairly logical conclusion, but frankly, I can't say anything. I don't want to conclude this until I hear the testimony.
Well, neither are we, but I mean, it would seem that somebody should have known that if 1 out of every 5 possibly was taking some sort of narcotic, it could be opium, and certainly LSD, why there might have been a more stricter administration. Before we get into another angle of this, Senator, it's traditional on this program to say that across this WEVD microphone this evening is State Senator John H. Hughes, head of the Joint Legislative Committee on Crime, who has been going into crime in our business and organized crime, and now going into the prevalence of narcotics, opium, marijuana, and so on the campuses. Where else did you say, Senator, there was such
Well,
use?
again, I can't speak of personal knowledge, but I have a letter that came in today from one of the senators who represents the area around Buffalo, Erie County. And he asked if we would come up and make inquiry with respect to the State University at Buffalo. I had a call this morning from the district attorney of Tompkins County, which is where Ithaca is located. And he says that the situation at Cornell and he also suggests Ithaca College, which is in the same city, needs investigation. And I guess from what he said, they'd had a meeting of various district attorneys around the state, and this is not peculiar to any one school, but to a greater or lesser degree, there's a prevalence of it in the colleges. And he suggests that, and some of them suggest that also some of this is getting into high schools.
Any specific areas?
No, except he indicated that he knew about it in some of the high school areas.
Well, Senator, then what you've got is a monumental task, and your preliminary investigations give any substance to this? Now, you've talked of the Buffalo area. There are enormously large universities.
Well, they're talking about State University of Buffalo.
Oh, the State University
That's
in
right.
Buffalo. And possibly Cornell, Ithaca
At Cornell
College.
University.
And high
he
schools.
was talking about. Yeah.
Well, is there any evidence to show this is seeping down into the high schools?
I think there has been. I don't think this is particularly new. I think this has been true someplace on the island. I think in Westchester that I know of, and as I say, the district attorney in Tompkins County suggested there was something to this up his way.
Senator, I was that fascinated that I forgot to say that, though I presume my audience knows it, that I'm Victor Riesel of the Publishers Hall Syndicate, Syracuse Post-Standard.
Syracuse Post-Standard, great paper.
Great paper indeed. And in this area, I should say, the Newark Evening News. And we have our colleague from the AP here of 1,900 dailies. I wonder how one amasses that many. Senator, what will be the form of your investigation? You're going to be there for 2 days.
On this subject, we'll be there for 2 days, presumably tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. And we have under subpoena a representative of the police department, and I've left it to my counsel to select. It'll be the commissioner and those people who...
The commissioner of...
Commissioner Barry of Suffolk County Police.
Yeah.
and then the president of the school, and some of the persons who would be directly under him who would have responsibility for management and discipline and this sort of thing, you see.
Well, Senator, from there, if you find that there's substance to it, or whether you don't find any substance at Stony Brook, and now that you find that district attorneys and state senators, your colleagues, are coming to you with this other evidence, will you hold other hearings?
We will. We will. There's a limit, of course, as to what you can do, but I suggested that he discuss, Mr. Thaler is the district attorney of Tompkins County. I suggested today that as long as they'd been in conference, they go back in again and come up with some sort of a plan instead of a hit-and-miss proposition, that we could sort of centralize this and see to what extent the other schools are infected.
Well, how far do your plans go now after these 2 days?
I think it's hard to tell. I think we go as far as we think we need to. If this situation, Stony Brook, which has been specifically assigned to us, if this situation is in need of further inquiry, we'll make it.
Where, at Stony Brook?
Well, we may go to Stony Brook. This meeting will be in New York City.
Sure.
These 2 meetings will be in New York City.
But, Senator, it's a very startling concept to hear that your own colleagues and the DAs of other counties, Erie and then Tompkins and the rest, are finding this going into the universities and into the colleges. Do you have any idea from your own investigations into organized crime which might lead to the source of the organization supplying this varied form of narcotics to school children, high school children, as well as colleges? There must be some thoughts, some basis that your committee has discovered.
Well, compared to what you know about it, I'm strictly an amateur on this subject of organized crime. But I've had enough evidence of its infiltration into most everything that you could think of. And traditionally, narcotics, as well as gambling and so on, have been basics in providing the wherewithal. And therefore, I would assume that if there is as widespread use of these drugs, there must be pretty good substantial sources. And if, as was suggested to me, that some people around on the campus actually is in the sort of salesmen, I suppose they're the lower echelon, but they must have to get their material from some larger, greater source.
Senator, have you been to see George Belka or Giordano or George Gaffney of the local and the federal bureaus of narcotics? I mean, have you talked to them? Do they say anything? Do they cooperate with you?
No, we haven't gotten into that with them, actually. No, we haven't.
They might. I find them 3 very excellent men. They might be a good source.
Mr. Anslinger has been a consultant for us. He was the director of the bureau, as you remember, for a good many years, and now is with the United Nations.
Is Harry Anslinger
Yes.
one of your?
That's right.
He's a very old and very great friend.
Yeah.
He's a little
Very talented man in this field.
And is he now with the narcotics?
He's with the he's with the United Nations as a sort of a consultant on the subject of narcotics.
Oh, well, gee, you awakened great memories. It was Harry Anslinger who in 1953, I went to dinner at the White House the other night, and I always now say 1968 or 1950.
I read about it.
Well, thank you, Senator Hughes.
I always read about you.
That's that other party we're talking about.
I know.
But the Senator, 1953, Anslinger arranged for me to go on a narcotics raid out of Yokohama. And we did, and I think with the narcotics police, we hit a house, a woman who was attempting to subvert our troops, and she was. We got a search warrant, and she was arrested, did 10 years later. I remember telling it to Harry, it's the first raid I've ever covered my bare feet. We got into the house, took my shoes off. But, Senator, if suppose you do find this, and you are going to other universities, what will you do with your report when you get to it?
Well, I think we go back to the legislature, and it's our job, of course, in this, so we'll understand each other. In this Stony Brook transaction, our particular relationship to this is on the criminal side. There's another committee which is headed by Assemblyman Kotler, which has to do with higher education, and this is a very broad concept. Everything that would be involved in the state university, and apparently he's going to do something about this too. I don't know what his attitude will be, but as far as we're concerned, the question, really the basic question here is, were the authorities, the administration of the university, were they cooperating with the police or weren't they? And
That's a very serious matter,
The
yeah.
suggestion has been made, and I suppose it'll be pro and con when we hear the witnesses. The suggestion has been made that the university by the police, that the university was not cooperating. They gave them an opportunity to, and they didn't. And under these circumstances, their idea is that the campus became a sanctuary for offenders, if you will, because the police were not allowed to come in. And they were the judges and the jury.
They, you mean the faculty,
The administration would decide, and actually they had a rule to this effect, that one of the officers, whatever his title may be, should first pass on the propriety of contacting the police. He would determine, in the case of a given student, as to whether this was something should be brought to attention of public authorities. And we don't think, of course, if this is true, that there should be
sanctuary.
two rules. The same rules for everybody apply.
In other words, what you might discover, and you think you've been discovering, is that somewhat in the Latin American tradition, mostly where universities, and I remember them well having covered them, are sanctuary even for murderers. And now we find that the police, if they cannot get on here, the universities could become sanctuary. I suppose you and your colleagues will look to prevent that.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Well, Senator, just let me say again to the audience that the voice you've been hearing is that of Senator John H. Hughes, Chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee on Crime, and we've been talking about the possibility of universities, or at least some, or one, having been the sanctuary for narcotics pushing and narcotics peddling, narcotics using, because the police could not, for a while, go onto the campus, and tomorrow morning there'll be a hearing on Stony Brook. But could we swing now to the future plans on organized crime? Your hearings into that are not over.
No, we just actually just gotten them underway. We had 2 days, 2 weeks ago and last week. And we were scheduled to go on tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday of this week, but because of this interruption, we postponed that temporarily. I would think before, sometime in the middle of February maybe, we'll get back to the question of organized crime again.
Where are you going to be looking for organized crime? I mean,
well, what we've done so far, of course, has been to get the benefit of the experience of the police department. We've had as witnesses the Inspector Cattell, the head of the Central Intelligence Bureau here in the city. We've talked with one man who recently led a task force in the Erie County area in connection with one particular group up there who were involved in organized crime, and we've heard from others who were actually have been working in this field for a long time. And then we've had the benefit of listening to a number of recordings. These would be either miniphone or wiretap or a bug of some sort. And
recordings by whom?
By recordings of the conversations by those participants in whatever criminal acts were involved at the time.
Well, now, where are you going from here? What had you intended to do tomorrow before you were interrupted by the gravity of the situation?
We have a number of people under subpoena, and the project that we were going after, or the vein in which we were moving, because there's so many ways that we can move, as you know, was in the area of labor consultants.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let's us get into this in detail.
I thought maybe
this is Victor Riesel of the Publishers Hall Syndicate, talking to Senator John H. Hughes, Chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee. Senator, what do you mean?
Exactly that.
Who?
Well, you mean who would be subpoenaed?
Yes.
Well, we've subpoenaed Mr. Gambino. We've subpoenaed Johnny Dio. We've subpoenaed a man named Musto, who was involved in who runs a meat business out on the island, and a series of others. And I can't remember the names of all the people, you see.
What do you...
We think this is one area where there has been an invasion, which is really hard to pin down. I'm sure you know much more about it than I do, but we're going to try to get the people in.
What are you looking for example, in the area of labor consultants?
We think that, one, that... and I think probably if we can prove it, that many businessmen are submitting to the services which these people have to offer, because this is an easy way to do it, and they get certain benefits, whatever they may be. And to this end, we hope to bring in not only those who we think are the accused, those who would be involved in this thing, but to bring in the legitimate business people too, and ask them why, if a company A or Association A, which had to do claims hold itself out to be labor consultants, and it develops that they seem to be on both sides of the street, mixed up with a union, so-called, and with an association. We want to find out how come what type of service did they render them, this type of thing.
Let's take Carlo Gambino. Has he any clients now?
I don't know whether he does or not. He was a member of that firm as the SG&S, that's right.
Well, what do you expect to get from Gambino? He's the head of one, according to the reports and the legislative testimony and so on, he's the head of one of the 5 so-called Cosa Nostra families here. Now, he's reputed to be a very tough guy with a very bad ticker. I was just wondering what would you expect to get from Carlo Gambino?
I really don't know what we'd get from him. I think this is a matter of inquiry. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe he won't come. I don't know.
Was it difficult getting him served?
I think not. I think we had people out a week ago serving, I think simultaneously.
And what about Johnny Dio? What do you expect?
His lawyer called our counsel.
Who's his lawyer?
His lawyer, I can't think of his name.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you, well, of course, undoubtedly they'll come in and take the fifth. But I'm curious, do you know of any unions with which they're allegedly associated, or any?
I personally don't know.
In what areas? Would it be the waterfront? Would it be real estate? Would it be food?
I think maybe in I don't know about real estate, but I think probably in food and trucking possibly, and waterfront to some extent, yes. Mm-hmm.
And you must have some procedure in addition to that. Are there any labor leaders you're going to call?
I don't know at this point.
Or businessmen, specific businessmen?
I don't have any specific names, but this is our intent.
Well, in the labor relations field, then what you're looking for is the tie between the employer who uses the so-called Cosa Nostra types against the unions, or unions which are infiltrated. Are you going into any unions at all?
I think we will if it develops that they're not real. We have understanding that some of these unions are really not unions for the benefit of the union member. I had a man call me last night in my office in the Capitol, and he was very secretive about what he wanted to tell me. And I don't know him from Joe Brown. He told me what his name was, but he didn't want anybody to know. And then he went on to tell about how these people in his union were being exploited, and he tied it into this sort of thing and said he's not been able to get any satisfaction anywhere. Now, whether this is a good story or it isn't, or whether it's true or not, I don't know.
Well,
I propose to have someone see him and discuss the matter.
Well, they're all very secretive, and of course there are.
Well, they're afraid. He says he's afraid. Now, whether he is or not, I don't know.
Well, they are. I can tell you that. Senator, in any of your crisscrossing investigations, have you run into those involved in the Marcus, so-called Marcus scandal? Tony Ducks Corralo, in addition to Johnny Dio, there's a Mr. Danny Moto of the Bakery and Confectionery Workers local out here. Is there anything of that sort that come across your purview?
No, I haven't heard any by names, except I think maybe some of the police department mentioned Corralo's name in the course of discussions, but I can't remember in what context. But I can say this, that it appears that one of the big things in this day and age is the question of loan sharking, and that this is a vehicle by which they get to people who otherwise would be responsible people, legitimate people in a community, and get to use them. And we heard some of these discussions, of course, on the recordings which were made.
Are you going to subpoena Tony Ducks?
I don't know about that, and I don't know whether he's under indictment, whether he would talk anyway.
Let me ask you, I guess none of them really will, but let me ask you this about wiretapping. Do you think there's enough or not enough wiretapping? You think the enemies of so-called eavesdropping, electronic eavesdropping of any kind, are enemies of the war on crime, or enemies?
I think two things.
Sure.
One is I think that there has been a lot of indiscriminate wiretapping.
By whom?
I think by police agencies all over. I think that has been pretty loose, and by district's attorney. We subpoenaed the records of the New York telephone company here a few weeks ago, and we found that, and I don't know what this proves, but this was just New York, and there are a lot of independent companies, as you know, in the state other than New York.
Yeah.
But there were 22,000 in 12 years.
22,000
orders.
wiretaps? Orders?
Orders. Now, how many there may have been which were, put on without an order or whatever, no one knows. But the point I make is that I think that there has been maluse probably in many instances, and that the Supreme Court, there's some merit in the things the Supreme Court said. On the other hand, I think that if the police are denied the use of this legitimately, that they've lost contact.
Are you going into the 22,000? Are you going to?
We're going to, but again, this is a big job too.
Sure.
You know, you got to have people to actually. Yeah, we're going to find out who. We're going to have a breakdown of these and where they came from and so on, and try to determine the validity of how many. You see.
I'm going to break in because, as they say on those great big networks, that's all the time we have, and tell the audience out there that this exciting discussion has been with Senator John H. Hughes of Syracuse, a great town, a great newspaper town, too, who's chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee on Crime, and I'm Victor Riesel, also of the Syracuse Post-Standard,
Right.
the Publishers Hall Syndicate, and it's exciting to talk with you, and good luck in this fight.
Thank you.